match before suddenly, all at once on the 7 train? That question matters more than the scoreline, and I want to explain why before we go any further. Because the easy story here, the story every major outlet will tell you this week, is a resume story. Alex Eala, Rafa Nadal Academy graduate, Miami Open giant killer, Eastbourne finalist, first Filipina to do this and that. That story is true. It's also, in a way, the shallow version. It treats the crowd as a byproduct of the career. Follow the winds, get the fans, cause and effect, clean and boring. But if you stand on that woodside corner and actually watch who is getting on the train, you notice something the resume story cannot explain. You notice grandmothers who could not name a single WTA event before this year. You notice nurses coming off overnight shifts, still in scrubs under their Philippine flag jerseys. You notice teenagers born in New Jersey whose parents were born in Cebu. These are not tennis fans who found Alex Eala. These are Filipino Americans who were already here. And something about this specific Sunday made them decide to be here together. That is a different phenomenon than a fan base. And if we can figure out what it actually is, we understand something about her, about them, and about what the next 10 years of Philippine tennis is going to look like. So stay with me. If this is the kind of story you want more of on this channel, the meaning underneath the scoreline, hit the subscribe button now. We take our time here. We do this properly. First, who she is in 5 facts. Quickly, because most of you know, Alexandra Maniego Eala, 20 years old at the time of this debut, trained since age 13 at the Rafael Nadal Academy in Mallorca, Spain. In March of 2025, at the Miami Open, ranked 140th in the world, she beat the 2nd seed Iga Swiatek in straight sets to reach her first WTA Tour semifinal, the first Filipina ever to do so. In June, she made the final at Eastbourne on grass, a heartbreaker in a 3rd set tiebreak, still the first Filipina to reach a WTA Tour singles final. Heading into this U.S. Open per WTA rankings, she sits just outside the top 70, unseeded here in New York, reportedly nursing a shoulder issue from the North American hard court swing. That is who she is on paper, but paper is not why the 7 train is full, and that gap between the paper and the platform is where this story actually lives. Now let's build the puzzle, because there is a puzzle here, and it doesn't solve itself with the obvious tools. Take the first piece. Alex Eala, before this Sunday, has never played a U.S. Open main draw match, not one. 0 prior appearances at Flushing Meadows in the main event of a Grand Slam here in New York, and yet, across the 2025 season, at the Australian Open at Miami, at Eastbourne, at Wimbledon, at Toronto, broadcast cameras have kept finding the same thing in the stands. Groups of fans in Philippine flag colors, homemade signs in Tagalog and English, the kind of visible, organized cheering section that most players do not accumulate until well after their first slam breakthrough. So the puzzle is this: how does a player build a traveling, recognizable, cross-continental fan base before her first Grand Slam main draw match? Hold that question. We come back to it. Take a second piece. She is unseeded here. She is ranked, as I said, just outside the top 70. Under normal box office logic, unseeded first-round matches at a slam get outer courts. They get modest crowds. They get television coverage on the featured match channel only. Yet, Filipino community pages in New York and New Jersey have been circulating meetup plans for days. Ticket resellers noticed the pattern before the draw was even out. Community organizations in Woodside and Jersey City coordinated group travel. This is not the behavior of a fan base reacting to a seeding. This is the behavior of a fan base that decided on this player independent of the seeding. So the sub-question is, why does an unseeded player command this kind of pre-match mobilization? Hold that one too. It matters more later than it does right now. Take a third piece, and this one is the strangest. Look at her recent form honestly. Yes, Eastbourne final. Yes, the Miami quarterfinal against Swiatek, But look at Cincinnati 2 weeks before this debut, second round against Amanda Anisimova, and she takes the first set 6-4. She takes a 2-love lead in the third set. She is on the verge of a signature win over a top American, and then she loses 6 straight games. She exits the tournament. That is not the resume of a player who has fans mobilizing before her first-round match at the next slam. That is the resume of a player people are still trying to figure out. Fans, generally, do not travel for uncertainty. They travel for coronation. So the sub-question here is the sharpest one. If they are not showing up for her wins because the wins are inconsistent and she has 0 U.S. Open wins to show up for, then what exactly are they showing up for? Hold that. 3 paradoxes. A cross-continental fan base before a slam debut. A pre-match mobilization for an unseeded player, a crowd that shows up regardless of form. Under the obvious explanation, fans follow winners, none of it fits. And when 3 facts individually true, collectively refuse to fit, that is almost always your signal that you're using the wrong frame. So let's change the frame. Here is the assumption you and I have both been operating on, the one every sports narrative teaches us from the time we are children. Crowds are the product of careers. A player wins. A fan base grows. The fan base shows up. Cause upstream, crowd downstream. That is how it works for almost every athlete in almost every sport. Under that assumption, Alex Eala's U.S. Open crowd is a mystery because the career on paper is not yet big enough to explain the crowd on the ground. But now flip the assumption. What if, in her specific case, the crowd was never downstream of the career? What if the crowd was already assembled, geographically, culturally, generationally, long before Alex Eala was born and was simply waiting for someone to point at? Then everything above stops being a paradox. It becomes visibility. She is not creating a fan base. She is making a fan base visible to itself. Now hold those numbers in your head because this is the reframe. The New York, Newark, Jersey City combined statistical area, the tri-state area most of you think of as Greater New York, was home to more than 260,000 Filipino Americans as of census estimates. Roughly 94,000 of them live inside New York City itself per the Asian American Federation's 2025 profile, a population that grew 9.5% over the previous 5 years, faster than the city's Asian population overall. Nationally, Filipino Americans number more than 4 million. That is not a fan base Alex Eala built. That is not something she could build if she trained for a decade. That is a community that has been here for 4 generations. Nurses staffing overnight shifts at Elmhurst Hospital. Longshore and merchant marine families who settled in Jersey City in the 70s. Teachers, engineers, home health aides, restaurant workers, second and third generation kids in Woodside and Bergenfield and Union City. They have been here. They have been buying groceries, paying taxes, raising children, burying grandparents for decades. What they had not had until Alex Eala was a single scheduled hour on a U.S. Open show court to be in the same room about the same thing. That is the reframe. She is not the cause of the crowd. She is the permission slip. The train was always full. She just gave the passengers a stop to get off at. Take a breath there because that is a big pivot, and I want to make sure it lands before we prove it. The paradoxes only look like paradoxes if you assume the crowd is downstream of the career. Once you flip it, once you say the community was already assembled and she is simply the first person visible enough to gather it, the paradoxes dissolve, all 3 of them, at once. That is usually how you can tell a reframe is the right one. It doesn't just explain one strange fact, it explains all of them at the same time, without needing to bend any of them. So let's prove it. 3 proofs, escalating. Proof number 1 is the math, and the math is unforgiving. Filipino Americans in the New York CSA, more than 260,000. Filipino Americans in the 5 boroughs of New York City, 94,000. Filipino Americans nationally, north of 4 million. Now compare that number to the total number of Filipino players who have appeared in a U.S. Open main draw before Alex Eala in the Open era, which began in 1968. That number is 0. 0 appearances over 57 years from a national diaspora of 4 million people. The ratio of Filipino Americans to Filipino U.S. Open main draw representatives from 1968 until August 24, 2025 is mathematically infinite. That is not a statistic about tennis. That is a statistic about waiting. For nearly 6 decades, an enormous, well-established, geographically concentrated diaspora, one of the largest Asian American populations in the Northeast, had no one at this level to gather around. The demand was there the entire time. The supply was zero. On Sunday, August 24th, 2025, the supply becomes 1. And when a demand that has been building for 57 years meets its first unit of supply, of course, the 7 train is full. It would be stranger if it weren't. Proof number 2 is what Alex Eala herself says, because if the reframe is correct, she should already be talking about her fans the way you'd talk about a community you belong to, not the way you talk about a fan base you built. And that is exactly what she does. All year in on-court speeches and press conferences from Wimbledon to Toronto, she has thanked her supporters. But listen to the specific words she uses. At the Toronto press conference this summer, per Yahoo Sports coverage, she opened her remarks with the phrase, "Maraming salamat mga kababayan." Thank you very much, my countrymen, my fellow Filipinos. She does not say, "Thank you to my fans." She says kababayan. And that word is doing a lot of quiet work. In Tagalog, kababayan is not the word for a fan base. It is the word for people who share your homeland. It is a word about kinship, not consumption. She is calling them her countrymen because that is what they are. And because she correctly understands that the room's energy is not something she created, but something she was let into. In Toronto, after her run there, she said Filipino fans made her feel, quote, like she was home. That is not the language of a player who thinks she built a fan base. That is the language of a player who thinks she found her people. Linguistically, without ever using the word reframe, she confirms it. The word kababayan is the reframe in one word. Take another breath. Because the third proof is the one that matters most. And it does not depend on whether she wins on Sunday. Proof number 3 is the day itself. Not the match, the day. Because think about what the reframe actually predicts. If the crowd is downstream of results, then the emotional weight of Sunday depends entirely on the scoreline. Win, joy, lose, silence. Under the old assumption, everything is contingent. But under the reframe, Sunday is already historic before the first ball is struck. Because for the first time in the Open era, for the first time in 57 years of professional tennis, Filipino Americans in Queens and Filipino Americans in Jersey City and Filipino families in Bergen County and Filipino families watching from Cerritos and Dali City and Cebu and Manila are all at the same hour on the same day on American national television, watching the same Filipino player walk onto a U.S. Open show court. That has never happened, not once. And it is happening whether she wins in straight sets or loses in straight sets. The thing the diaspora is buying is not a result. It is a moment of simultaneity, a collective now, an hour in which the community is not scattered across 4 generations of immigration and 3 time zones and 40 states, but is instead briefly in one place about one person. That is what makes people who have never watched tennis before get on the 7 train. Not the prospect of a win, the prospect of finally, after 57 years of waiting, being counted in the same frame. That is the emotional climax of this Sunday. It is not the tiebreak, it is the tunnel walk, it is the moment before the first serve when the camera pans the stands and the flags are already there. That is the proof, and no scoreline in either direction can take it away. Now let me be honest about what the reframe does not prove, because if I skip this part, I am doing exactly what I told you at the top of this video I would not do. The reframe does not prove Alex Eala will win her debut. It does not prove she will win her second round. It does not prove she will ever win a Grand Slam. Cincinnati, 2 weeks ago, is a real data point. She led Amanda Anisimova 2-0 in a third set, and then lost 6 games in a row. There are legitimate questions in her game right now about closing under pressure at the tour level. That question is not resolved. The shoulder issue reportedly bothering her since the summer swing is not resolved either. And the second thing the reframe does not prove is that every Filipino face in Flushing on Sunday is from New York. Some traveled from the Philippines. Some flew in from California. Some drove down from Toronto after her run there. The reframe is not that the crowd is exclusively local. The reframe is that the critical mass of the crowd was already local, already present, already waiting, and that is what makes the mobilization possible on this scale, on this short a notice for an unseeded first-round match. And the third honest limit, the biggest one, is this. As I record this, the match has not yet been played. I do not know how it ended. By the time you are watching this, you may already know. This video is not and was never about that. If she wins, the reframe holds. If she loses, the reframe still holds. Because the thing we've been describing is not contingent on the scoreline. It is contingent on the day existing at all, and the day is going to exist either way. So let me bring it home. The 7 train from Woodside will run again on Monday morning. It will run in September, and in October, and in the years after Alex Eala is no longer 20, no longer unseeded, no longer new. What August 24th, 2025 does is not create a fan base. It names one that was already there. 260,000 Filipino Americans in the New York metropolitan area, 94,000 in the 5 boroughs, more than 4 million across this country, have been building lives here for 4 generations. What they had not had until this Sunday was a scheduled hour to be in the same room about the same thing on national American television. She didn't build them. She didn't earn them in the transactional sense. She found them, and they found her, and the word she uses for what happened between them is not fan base. It is kababayan, countrymen, and that is why the 3 paradoxes we started with are not paradoxes anymore. The traveling fans across Australia and Miami and Wimbledon and Toronto are not a career byproduct. They are a diaspora that finally has coordinates. The pre-match mobilization for an unseeded player is not irrational. It is 57 years of demand meeting its first unit of supply. And the crowd that shows up regardless of form is not confused about tennis. It is showing up for something that is not and has never been about the tennis. It is about the room. That is what she represents. Not a ranking, not a title, though she may win those. She represents the first hour in the open era of tennis in which a diaspora of 4 million people is finally scheduled to be in one place on one channel watching one of their own walk out under the New York lights. Whatever happens on the scoreboard, that